All right, once again, welcome everyone to our second day of our conference. And at this time, I'd like to introduce a very, very special uh, presenter. But also, I would like to recognize one individual that I guess I have just seen out there in the audience, former president of the University of Guam, Dr. Jose Cruz. He's right there. Can we please give him a big round of applause? Despite his condition, he is able to join us. He's very determined to navigate all the way to Saipan. Okay, so thank you again, Dr. Cruz. Bueno provecho. The Honorable Robert Underwood is a former member of the U.S. Congress and is currently the president of the University of Guam. As an educator, he has served as a high school teacher, curriculum writer, administrator, Dean of the College of Education and Academic Vice President. He is a distinguished scholar with many publications on education, regional political issues, indigenous concerns, and cultural change. He served as the congressional delegate for Guam in the 103rd and 107th Congresses from 1993 to 2003, during which he sponsored major legislation for Guam, played an active role in the Department of Defense, authorization bills, and was a forceful advocate for political development for insular areas. As an active member of the Asian, Pacific American, and Hispanic caucuses, he was a leading voice for the extension of education and social opportunities for all Americans. In recognition for his efforts in building good relationship in the Pacific, he received the Presidential Merit Award from the President of the Philippines and congratulatory resolutions from Pohnpei, FSM, and Northern Marianas legislatures. He has also been honored by several national Asian Pacific American organizations and was named Citizen of the Year by the National Association of Bilingual Education in 1996 and Alumnus of the Year by Cal State University, Los Angeles in 2000. His public service includes an appointment to the National Advisory Council on Bilingual Education during President Carter's administration, and an appointment by President Obama to the National Board of Education Sciences. He also served as chairman of the Chamorro Language Commission for over a decade, and is widely acknowledged as a leading authority on cultural, educational, and linguistic issues in Guam and Micronesia. He was awarded a Lifetime Achievement Award by the Guam Humanities Council, is the only professor emeritus of bilingual bicultural education at the University of Guam. In 2003, he helped create the Asian Pacific Islander American Scholarship Fund and served as the first chairman of the board. He has worked on several research projects with the East-West Center, the University of Hawaii, and the Asian Pacific Center for Security Studies. Robert was born on Guam. How old is he? He will share. And educated in Guam and California. He graduated from John F. Kennedy High School in Guam and received a bachelor's degree and master's degree from Cal State University in Los Angeles. He holds a Doctor of Education degree from the University of Southern California, and he's also my former professor at University of Guam. Please let us welcome Dr. Robert Anacletus Underwood.
Thank you very much. You just must say Jonas. Jonas forgot to include that he was my student at one time, and I won't tell you the quality of his work, but I will attest to the quality of his professional service all these years. So thank you very much, Jonas. You know, it's an honor and a privilege, and sendongklo na pribilehiyo para be fanam zo pago na hanig vini ipunitun isla sa ipan sa takwentos dididi put kultura jan lingwahe. And it's always interesting to try to talk about these topics, you know. And I've been talking about these topics for a long time, and I have to confess that it hasn't done much good. I keep talking some more, and we keep going over, in many ways, the same topics and the same issues. And as we continue to feel the grasp and the pull and the source of concern about who we are as people. It's an amazing and poignant and sad and inspirational story all at the same time. You know, I just came from a presentation by Mr. Welch and Dr. Demapan on a very interesting project, and they had this incredibly poignant video about a grandmother trying to explain to a kindergartner her experiences during World War II, in which the grandmother was obviously not very comfortable in English, and the kindergartner didn't know any Chamorro or knew very little. It was so poignant, and it was emblematic of the kinds of struggles that we go through as peoples. And to try to kind of feel that, and to kind of figure out what is it that you're going to do about it, and what place do you think this holds in our lives as educators, as people who are in the production and the reproduction and the generation and the regeneration of knowledge and passing on traditions and cultures. What do we do about that? And the saga of it all is so sometimes so dispiriting. You know, you seize upon stories, and you seize upon representations, and you seize, and after you've been at this for a while, you know, when I first started talking about culture and language, it was back in the 70s, and people used to say, wow, you know, they used to see my name in print, and they'd hear people say, wow, this guy's talking up a storm, and you ought to hear him. And then when I would meet people, they say, wow, we thought you were some old white guy. It turns out you're not some old white guy. Well, now I'm just some old brown guy. So I've been doing this for a little while, but in those days, used to kind of think about the stories that kind of animate you. The most interesting way to look at it is, of course, is that human beings are and this is just my history training, human beings are the only living things that can remember a time before they were born. Human beings can remember a time before they were born. And that the power of that vision and the power of that imagination is really incredible. Because if you don't have a clear memory of that, then you have no sense of place. You have no sense of time. You have no sense of importance. So remembering who you are, even before you're born, is so incredibly important. You know, one of the most poignant stories I ever heard was my father. You know, my grandfather was a U.S. Marine. James Holland Underwood came to Guam in 1901, probably one of the first Marines to actually live in Guam, married Ana Pangilinan Martinez. And my father grew up in that environment those days, you know, mestizo americano, and he first left Guam when he was 13 or 14 years of age, born in 1911. He went to Guam. So you only got half of what I heard. Let me repeat. Let me repeat the story. So when he left Guam in those days, he went to school. He was sent away to go to boarding school in North Carolina. This was in the 1920s. And when he got on the ship, the way that ship, the way people used to travel in those days, they used to have an army transport called the Gold Star. Would go from San Francisco to Hawaii, to Guam, to the Philippines, and it was an army transport, and the Philippines was basically being run by the army. And then you would go on to Hong Kong, Shanghai, Tokyo, and then back to San Francisco. He got on the ship, and in those days, they used to do a lot of choral singing. You know, people get on the ship. Maybe you've seen some of this in old movies. You watch the bouncing ball. there's like a little slide up there of a song, and then you follow the bouncing ball, and everybody would sit around and kind of sing. And the song went like this: "Oh, we'll never go back to Guam anymore. We'll never go back to Guam. For the natives, they are lazy, and they drive the white folks crazy." Okay. Now, you know, when you hear kind of wonder what people see in their lives and how motivated they are to do things. So you fast forward that. I remember that story well because my father used to like to say, not out of anger or bitterness. And it's interesting. Sometimes when you tell that story, people laugh. Sometimes when you tell that story, people cry. Sometimes people say, well, I don't know what to do with that story. Because it cuts to the source of, ethnicity and perspective and who you are and who others think they are. And so you have this kind of phenomena going on in which people are, in a way, being asked to be disjointed from themselves. And somebody has the power to create that, the ability and the capacity to peel that away, to create basically dismembered human beings because they lack the memory to understand who they are. So it's that memory loss, and it's that desire to move away from that memory and the desire to move into something else that is kind of, it's tragic. It's tragic. But you know, my father and my mother, they were, I was the last one in my family. I was the only child born after World War II. So, my parents were generally older than most of my contemporaries' parents. And my parents were both fairly well educated, both very good English speakers, both very good Chamorro speakers. And because they were those things and because they had this kind of feistiness about them, they taught me never to believe anything anybody ever told you unless you ask for evidence. So I didn't, whatever people did or whatever they said, I just had a kind of a natural oppositional nature to it. And so I'm grateful for that background. So they didn't buy into all that other stuff. We spoke Chamorro at home. No matter what happened, no matter what was going on in the rest of the world. And I left Guam when I was 9. And so, still that kind of feistiness and that sense of who you are and what makes you special was very, very strong. So when I went back to Guam in the 1963 to go to high school, I was amazed that there were some of my, not very many in those days, I mean, this was maybe 10, 15% of the students I was hanging around with who couldn't really speak Chamorro. Or, they would understand, but they didn't really. But many were very good Chamorro speakers, excellent Chamorro speakers. And then when I was talking to those students, I kept wondering to myself, why is it that I speak better Chamorro than these people when I was gone all this time? What happened? What started to get me to think seriously about the role of language and identity and cultural change? And there were students, I remember, there were contemporaries, I would get on the bus, they were funny, they were witty, excellent Chamorro speakers. They were speaking Chamorro at levels that I envied, that I was jealous of because I didn't really have that cultivation. And then I fast forward 40 years later, 50 years later, when I talk to these same people, half the time they're answering me in English, and then I find that I am now the leading Chamorro authority. What an irony. Never in my wildest imagination did I think, well, I will end up being more knowledgeable about the inner workings of Chamorro than those contemporaries who I envied very much at the time. So some of that is a product of self-interest. But there has been a lot of things going on in the meantime. So we have the project, like as Mr. Welch and Dr. Demapan speaks about, an immersion program. I think they're going to start in Kakman. I'm really happy to hear about that. But as we do that, so all of you here as members of the Pacific Consortium all must subscribe to the belief that, Pacific culture should be at the top of our game, should receive emphasis, should receive special accolades, should be at the center of our curriculum. We should cultivate this. And if you ask people in general, is this important? And if you went and did surveys, everybody will say, oh yeah, this is really important. We should learn about our culture, and we should learn our language. I'm just not going to use it much, but we should learn it. Somebody should learn it, and somebody should be teaching it, but don't ask me to do it, but somebody should be doing it because it's really important. But if you ask him a different question, is it more important than teaching science? Well, that's a different question. Where is it in terms of your real priorities? If you ask it in isolation, we'd all say it's important. But if you said, okay, how much time should we spend on this? Anything else? We'll find out that the prioritization process throws all this language and cultural attention right back to where it used to be. Because it isn't a priority. It's an interesting thing. It's a romantic thing. It's a romantic notion. So let me just read you something from UNESCO. In a document issued by UNESCO under the question, why is indigenous knowledge important? Indigenous peoples of the world retain our collective evolutionary experience and insights which have slipped our grasp. While no one would suggest that the remainder of the more than 5 billion people on the planet would live at the level of indigenous societies, it is equally clear that we cannot pursue our present course of development, nor can we rely on technology to provide an easy answer. Indigenous peoples have evolved over many centuries a judicious balance between their needs and those of nature. The notion of sustainability, now recognized as the framework for our future development, is an integral part of most indigenous cultures. Really? Is that true? Sounds nice, but is that really true? Well, you're not going to get much discord from that from members of the Pacific Circle Consortium. But I just have to ask, is that really true? Are indigenous peoples just kind of predisposed to sustainability? They have a higher ethical value notion of their relationship to nature? Is that really true? I've known a lot of indigenous people who have no sense of sustainability and no sense of the meaning of what it means to shift back and forth between sustainability and non-sustainability and the role of technology in their lives. Now, if you believe that, and you believe in the place for Pacific Island cultures and indigenous, and you want to put it at the top of your curriculum game, you have to answer that question. If you can't answer the question, then you're going to get defeated at every turn. At every attempt to prioritize curriculum efforts, you're going to be defeated, and you're just going to be passed off as some kind of, well, it's romantic. Yeah, of course, indigenous, like the Indian chief, which has been now replicated 1 million times. Remember the Indian chief who had that tear in his eye as people were trashing the land? Remember that very powerful vision? This was about 30, 40 years ago. That guy who plays, and he played an Indian in dozens of movies. And he had this little tear in his eye as people were trashing the land. Then we find out, 30, 40 years later, this guy's not even an Indian. He's a Sicilian Italian from Louisiana who kind of looks like an Indian. Then we find out that he played a lot of Indian parts, so therefore he must really be an Indian. Well, you have to grapple with that. Because the romantic notion is not the same as the reality. And if you don't teach reality, children will find you out right away. Children will find you out right away. And everything that you taught up to a certain point would be dismissed. Now, I don't mean this to be a criticism, but there was one instance in this video that we saw this morning where an older woman was explaining her experience in the Bokungo, in the Japanese-made air raid shelter, And people were explaining this experience. And so the child made the video, during the war, they went all over the place and they hid in the Bokungo and they hid in the caves and they covered it with coconut leaves and banana leaves, and then they went down to the Pantalan, to the dock area, and then they were free. The Americans came and they were free. Now, as any historian knows, that's just not true. Now, at some point in time, when are you going to provide a little dose of reality for this child? First of all, the experience of running around and hiding in caves probably lasted 2 or 3 weeks at the end of the Japanese time period. Didn't happen right. It wasn't like they spent the whole war walking around hiding in caves. Just didn't happen that way. And then, of course, when the U.S. forces got the Chamorros, after the battle for Saipan, they put them in a camp. They put them in a camp for, almost a year. And you know when the Americans decide to let them out of the camp? July 4th. So that they would forever celebrate their encampment as liberation. But it was the people who were putting him in the camp that was letting him out. And so that's the July 4th that we just celebrated the other day. I mean, it's totally artificial. So when the Philippines was granted independence after World War II, the U.S. said, we're going to grant you independence on July 4th. And so they granted the Philippines independence on July 4th, thinking, well, the Philippines will forever celebrate July 4th as their Independence Day. Well, within a year or two, the Filipinos said, that's not going to work for us. We're going to go back to June, when we had declared independence in 1898. We didn't get it, but we had declared it. So that's Philippine Independence Day. So somebody's got their historical gear working. You have to work. Think about this critically. Because that young man will be thinking that his grandmother and all the siblings were all freed, but actually they were put in camps. Then they were let out a year later on July 4th to, it's almost like, wow, what intelligent military commander thought up this idea? We're going to let them free, but we'll let them free on July 4th. Who thought this up? Well, people think this up all the time. So, it's like in Guam. People talk about the camps in Menengung, down in, which is where the Japanese force march people to go to the camps in Menengung. If you ask people, people know about Menengung, and people have heard all the, for years, lots of people heard lots of stories about Menengung, and you ask them, how long were the people in Menengung? And they'll say, you just give them a piece of paper. Some will say a month, some will say 2 years, some will say 3 months, some will say, well, the order for the Japanese went out on July 10th, 1944. So at maximum, they were there 2 weeks. But of course, it's a powerful experience. Lots of things happen. But it was a powerful and eventful 2 weeks. But the power of the imagination is not corrected in that. So we saw that, and we see that in, we just recently had FESPAC in Guam. Enormous event. 27 countries and territories, all showing their stuff. Rapa Nui took the island by storm. Because Rapa Nui sent the best looking people from Rapa Nui that you could ever imagine. The women were beautiful and stately. The men had these, were all like, they all looked like the thunder from down under. And they would dance like this. And the men had tattoos that had circles on their doggone. I'm looking at that and I'm going, really? That's what Rapa Nui is all about? I don't know, maybe it is. But I looked at it and I watched it and I kept thinking, this is a nightclub act. This is not traditional dancing. But I can't make that judgment. But nobody said anything. And so you watched the whole pageant, and you watched all the confusion, and you watched the compendium of history. And anybody who knows anything about dancing and traditional dancing and arts and crafts and all that could easily figure out, what was just a kind of an historical presentation, what is really a compendium, what is really reflective of their history. So you have the highly sensual, sexualized dancing that the Tahitians do, and the Cook Islanders do, and the Rapa Nui people do. More so than anybody else that I could imagine. And then you watch the other Polynesians, the Samoans, and the Tongans. And it's obvious that the missionaries did a number on them, because all of those dances are gone. The women are just hardly moving. So it's obviously a compendium of historical experience. And you watch the Norfolk Islanders, who are doing those kind of Tahitian dances, and they're singing in English. And of course, they're really descendants of the people from the Mutiny on the Bounty. So it's a reflection of their history. And then you have the Chamorros. I just don't get it. I try to get it. I try to get it. So first, we have all the Tautotano dancers and the chanting. And when I listen to the chants, I'm saying, what's the big deal on those chants? What are they really chanting? Listening to it very intently, and it's not really, there's nothing really significant about the chant. And I have to share an experience with this. Wahu Tautotano was the pageant done in 1984. And the Guahu Tautotano pageant was created by Carlos Taitano, who's my mother's first cousin. And he's always been a dancer. And he spent part of his when he went to high school in Hawaii before World War II. So he's always been fascinated about portrayals. And he's very knowledgeable about dancing. He's very knowledgeable about artistic expression. So he's always made, like, we should We're not Chamorros, we're Tautotano. We need to create or reimagine the dances. So he did the pageant. And I was the script writer because he asked me to come along. So I wrote the script for Guahu Tautotano. And he asked me to do that because I know a fair amount of Spanish, that I could kind of separate out the Spanish from the indigenous Chamorro terms, which most Chamorro speakers, can't make that distinction because it's so much a part of Chamorro already. So they really don't know how to make that distinction. And in the process, we made up chants. So let's make some chants. So we did, Guahu, Guahu Tautotano. We wrote the chants. We put them out in the pageant. This was like in 1983, 1984. Well, you fast forward 10, 15 years later, I'm a member of U.S. Congress, as Jonas points out. And I'd go to an event on Guam, and then there'll be some, 12-year-old saying, Congressman, you want to hear an ancient Chamorro chant? Sure, I'm ready for it. And so they give me this ancient Chamorro chant, and I say, well, I don't want to burst this bubble, but, that was written in Baza Gardens. Jotnya. But I don't mean to kind of belittle that. But the desire of the young people was to look for that authenticity which they thought that they lacked. And the criticism that I gave them was not that the chants were authentic or inauthentic, because nobody really can measure authenticity that way. You really don't know. We really don't know the origins of what we consider an authentic chant or an inauthentic chant. But what bothered me was that they were willing to dismiss the experience of their grandparents and their great-grandparents and their great-great-grandparents and go all the way back to a time of the Tautotano, which they could not possibly know, except through a very fertile imagination. So when you ask them, what dance do you think your grandparents were doing? You think they were doing this? Or do you think they were doing the batsu? Well, they were doing the batsu. And how do you think your grandparents dress? How do you think your grandparents saw themselves? And your great-grandparents? So I criticized that in a conference here. Leapfrogging through history. You leapfrog through history because you don't really want to know, because you don't really know. So I kept wondering, because as I imagine my grandparents and my great-grandparents, because, you can see them. I can go down to a cemetery in Guam and see my great-grandfather, Jose Mendiola Taitano, the first Cueto. I see him there. He's on a tombstone. They have a picture of him. It's called Tatangkatan. That man was born in 1840, left Guam in 1855, became a whaler. He was either, recruited forcibly or otherwise, left at 15, came back when he was 30, and then he lived the rest of his life on Guam. And in that, he fathered a lot of children, which became the most numerous group of Taitanos on Guam, the Ramas Cueto, Pamilyang Cueto. That became the most numerous and the most politically active. Okay? I'm there. I'm that. Carl Gutierrez is from the same clan. Joe T. San Augustine's from the same clan. Carlos Taitano is from the same clan. If you look at all the people who have been in politics for a long time in Guam, you'll find that they are rooted in that clan. And so, and that clan is primarily Protestant. It's primarily Baptist. They were primarily raised as Baptists. So, because of my great-grandfather, because he joined a whaling ship, and in those days, whalers, they became, sometimes they would join whaling ships where the The captains required them to read the Bible every day and to engage in religious activities. And of course, he came back to Guam in 1870. And at that time, of course, it was the middle of Spanish rule, but he started to read the Bible and help create this Chamorro Baptist Protestant tradition of nonconformists. I think that's why they all went into politics. They all just had the kind of nonconformist attitude, which apparently has been passed on along to me. So, when you look at all that, and then at the end in FESPAC, I just I was reading the newspaper, and it was a letter to the editor on FESPAC by on the Guam Post. He wrote, FESPAC depended entirely on the English language. Without the use of the English language, FESPAC could not have taken place. This underscores the simple fact that the most important language to learn is English, not the different languages of our ancestors. This is because we live in the modern world. Our ancestors did not. In the modern world, survival depends on Wi-Fi, not weaving. Credit cards, not clamshell carving. Networking, not net making. I speak no language other than English. I've traveled around the world 12 times, and I have always found that English served me well enough, and attempts to communicate in the local languages tended to produce misunderstanding. The reality, that's the real world. So the rest of us who were saying, wow, this is great. And I thought it was great. Patrick thought it was great. We were there saying, wow, this is great. Rode in on our canoes, just felt like empowered and enthralled. And then you get the dose of reality. Now, of course, the person who wrote that letter, we would like to dismiss. But the ideas that he has are not easy to dismiss because they're very real. And that forms the construct about which we have to engage. So, the question at the end of the day is, what are we really talking about? You know, what are we really talking about when we're talking about language and culture and teaching and education and knowledge? So the first item about knowledge is ownership. Ownership. Who owns the knowledge that we're learning? This is an important construct. When I was, many, many years ago, I was going to Kashrai to talk at a conference in Kashrai, and getting on the plane. I think this was the first time that Continental was really flying to Kashrai. This was like 87, 88, around that time period. I was getting on the plane, and I overheard these two guys from the States talking. And as the plane landed, you know, one guy looked out the window and said, hey, look, they're driving our cars. They're driving our cars. And then, when we got off and we were looking around the airport, and they had some, this is a true story, they had some washing machines there. It says, look, they're using our washing machines. Now, of course, these two guys are just ignorant guys, you know. So we like to say, oh, they're just ignorant guys. They don't know what they're talking about. They didn't make the cars. Technology and knowledge of technology belongs to all human beings. In some sense, it belongs to all human beings. But in reality, there are people who think they own knowledge and people who think they're loaning it to you. That's the reality. So, how do you own knowledge? Who owns knowledge is an important and vital construct. Because if you don't deal with that in the context of curriculum and in teaching our children, it's always going to be a giver-donor, donor-recipient relationship. Somebody's getting it, somebody's giving it, and that means that whoever is giving it is in a superior standing, and whoever is receiving it is in an inferior standing. So that knowledge, the capacity to think that you own knowledge, is really important. The second construct, and I'll end with this, is membership. Okay? Now, membership is in the process of generating knowledge. How do we generate knowledge? And this is where your curriculum structures, I believe, can make the most difference. This is why a project like Mr. Welch was working on is so vital. Because when you help generate knowledge, when you generate the stories, when people find that they can have real meaning in their lives and in the lives of their parents and their grandparents, because they're constructing knowledge. They're regenerating and they're constructing knowledge for themselves, then they own the process of knowledge making and knowledge mediating knowledge. And so it is so vital to begin the process of learning by learning about yourself. Because when you do that, you have great ownership. I'll give you one class, this example. My fourth child, Ramon, was put in a preschool program in Georgia, MU Lujan. He was in a preschool program. And the teacher was so excited to tell me, said, you know, Mr. Underwood, you know, and these were like all 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. Mr. Underwood, my father in Vermont just sent me a really exciting items that I want to share with the kids. What is it? It says, it's autumn leaves. Autumn leaves. Yeah, you know, leaves that just fell off the tree. And then I can share it with the kids so that the kids will know the change of the season. And they'll have real tactile experience in how this is, what is, you know, how to observe changes. So I said to her, trying to remember how my father would handle this, or my mother. I said, so, have you taught them the difference between the rainy and the dry season? You know, a lot of changes in the rainy and the dry season. Grass is different. Different insects come out. All kinds of things happen. There's a classic, you know, the rhythm of planting, the rhythm of the resources are all dependent upon the rainy and the dry season. What season are we in right now? Are we in the rainy or the dry season? I'm not sure. Not sure. Well, now you can tell we're in the rainy season. Just thank God it got here. But she didn't know. Because she felt that she owned knowledge. She felt that she owned knowledge that was more important than what that, in a way, I've used this example over and over, but it is so critical to understanding that when you become a member, when you are a member of knowledge production, you become empowered to create and develop more knowledge. If you're just an observer of knowledge production, or you're being allowed to participate in somebody else's knowledge production, you feel like an outsider. You feel like you don't belong. And you don't create knowledge. You don't become fully formed. You don't become fully educated. Adrienne Rich, who's was a famous poet who was a radical feminist, lesbian, once wrote, said, when someone someone who has the power of a teacher describes a world and you're not in it, it has the same effect as looking into a mirror and seeing nothing. That's the capacity of educators. That's the ability of educators to help try to redirect that. Not just for the sake of romantic notion of maintaining indigenous languages and cultures, but because you're saving people. You're making them more empowered. You're making them more reflective. You're making them better and more effective learners. So at the end of the day, when we think about the role of Pacific cultures and languages in the 21st century, you're going to lose the argument if you say my technology is as good as yours. You're just going to lose that argument but that's not the argument. That isn't the argument. That can't be the argument. The argument is that knowledge is for all humans to have. No one has exclusive knowledge, exclusive ownership over knowledge. And the second part is that all people can be meaningful participants, active members in knowledge production. So that's the role that you all play in education. It's a role that we all play in education. And as you reflect back upon just your own personal childhood, or you imagine, what a child goes through in navigating and mediating the world, this is what we're confronted with. And never be afraid to take on not just people who claim they own knowledge, but also to be self-reflective. Indigenous cultures don't know a lot of things. And yes, indigenous knowledge and indigenous wisdom is strong and important, but it's not superior. It doesn't have any greater insight into indigenous and sustainability. It's not. There's no ethic there that makes one morally superior. I reject that too. But I embrace my indigenous background because of who I am. I don't embrace it and lord over other people. So the power over knowledge, the ownership over knowledge, the ability to create and recreate knowledge is all in your hands as practicing educators and as people that can make a difference in the lives of generations yet to come. Thank you very much.
How about a big round of applause again for Dr. Underwood. Thank you so much for your... Okay, for Dr. Underwood. Does anybody have any question? Any enlightening comment, questions that you guys would like to raise? So, answers to their questions. Anyone? Okay, at this time, we would like to call upon certain individuals. Dr. Underwood, if you can just stay on stage. Can we call upon Shiolon Dung, PCC Executive Committee, on stage, please, and Dave Attel, NMC Interim President, and Richard Setter, RTI International, Jackie Kirigwa from PSS, please, to come on stage, as we will be presenting a small token of your participation, Dr. Underwood. And I guess we'll have the president to read it out.
The Certificate of Distinguished Recognition is awarded to Dr. Robert A. Underwood for his presentation entitled Cultural Heritage in Pacific 21st Century School, What is the Point? At the 40th Annual Conference of the Pacific Circle Consortium, signed by Dr. Rita A. Sablan, myself, and Dr. Richard Sedler. Thank you very much.
How about a big round of applause again, please? Very inspirational speaker, lecturer, Dr. Underwood.
We have 30 minutes for the merienda or tea time. So please help yourself to all the treats back in the room. And you'll be going out to the presentation or the sessions at 11:15 to 12 o'clock. And so by 12 o'clock, please return in for lunch. Thank you.
Test, test. And just a reminder, everyone, please do not go out for lunch. There's lunches that are already been prepared for all of you. It's free. Okay, it's part of the package deal. And also tomorrow evening, don't forget again, we will be having our dinner over at Hibiscus Fiesta Resort. Everyone is invited, and I know you all should have a ticket. Okay, a ticket in your packet. So please make sure you don't lose that ticket for as accountability to welcome you into the Hibiscus. Please, if you have any questions or concerns, please do let us know. There's the committee members are in blue shirt. Okay, also head over to the registration for more information. Okay, again, please enjoy the remaining sessions today, this morning, and also in the afternoon. So again, welcome and enjoy your day. Thank you.